evening, everybody. My name is Ron Hansen. I am a national politics reporter with the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com. I'm also host of the Gaggle Politics podcast that we have each week. I've been with the Republic 17 years, and in that time, I've seen Arizona move from a reliably red Republican state to a state more like Ohio, where I grew up, where now a presidential battleground. Tonight, the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress and our panelists welcome you for a discussion on Arizona elections. First, you'll hear me ask the panel some questions, and then we'll hear some questions from you all. If you want to ask a question or note a concern, please write on note cards that should be under your seats. You can submit them by placing them into the question baskets when those are picked up later in the program. Also under your seat is a card with a QR code on it. If you could point your cell phone camera at that, it should take you to a brief survey about this event. If you would do that later as we conclude, you can add your voice to the survey and tell us what you think. And before we get started, I want to tell you a bit about the FMC. It is a bipartisan, nonprofit organization with more than 800 former members of Congress in the House and the Senate, including those on stage tonight. The FMC seeks to strengthen Congress as an institution, educate the public about what Congress does, and promote democracy at home and abroad. And it's done on a voluntary, pro bono basis. Tonight's event is intended as a bipartisan conversation about elections and election security with community leaders and concerned citizens alike, because the national conversation on this topic, frankly, has been a recurrent and divisive subject in Arizona as around the country. It should go without saying, but for our system of government to work, it's essential that every American believes that our elections are fair and secure. That's especially true in a state that could decide the power of Washington, the power of balance in Washington, both in the House, the Senate, and in the White House. We want to thank in advance the Maricopa County Recorder, Stephen Richer, and both former members of Congress here tonight for agreeing to take part in this dialogue. Hopefully, we'll all leave tonight with a deeper understanding of how our elections are conducted and with greater confidence that these systems are conducted fairly and transparently. With that, let's meet our panelists. I will start with, right next to me, former Congressman Sam Coppersmith. He is a Democrat. Sam represented Phoenix and parts of the East Valley in Congress from 1993 to 1995. He served on the House Transportation and Infrastructure and Science, Space, and Technology committees. After his congressional tenure, Coppersmith served as chair of the Arizona Democratic Party and currently serves as partner at his firm, Coppersmith Rockelman Lawyers in Phoenix, where he practices many different areas of the law. Sam, does that sound about right?
Good enough.
Okay, good enough. We won't talk past the sale. Next up, we have former Congressman Matt Salmon. He is to Sam's left, at least for the moment. That's right, okay. Matt served the East Valley and parts of Phoenix and Pinal County in Congress for 10 years across two very different political generations. In Washington, he served on the House Foreign Affairs, Education and Workforce, Small Business, and Science, Space, and Technology committees. Again, I think I've got that right. He chaired the Arizona Republican Party and also served in the Arizona State Senate before going to Congress at all. He currently serves as partner at his government affairs and consulting firm, AZDC Consulting.
Actually, that's different now.
Oh, no.
So I apologize. I am an advisor on international policy for Arizona State University.
Okay, excellent.
You might have heard of it before. Arizona State University.
I am familiar with their work.
Little school.
One school to rule them all.
There you go.
Or one school for all them to attend.
Yeah, 110,000 and counting.
Oh, yeah.
And last but certainly not least, we have the Maricopa County Recorder, Stephen Richer. He is a Republican as well. Since January 2021, Stephen has served as Maricopa County Recorder, which, as mentioned earlier, is a chief election official for Maricopa County. He's focused on initiatives intended to increase the transparency, accessibility, and efficiency of Maricopa County elections and the office overall. Prior to becoming Recorder, Richer worked in the business community as an attorney and with numerous conservative organizations such as Americans for Prosperity and the Federalist Society. Stephen, does that sound about right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Well, let's get started. Before we get into the discussion of election security measures that Arizona uses, I think it's important for the audience to understand what election administration looks like. So, as a reminder, this is something that the Constitution leaves to the states, if I'm not mistaken. There's no denying we live in an era when election administration has become more controversial, and too often election officials and the volunteer poll workers who help them carry out these elections face threats for the work that they do. So I want to start, Stephen, help our audience understand what running elections in Arizona has generally been like since you've been in office.
Well, I think the important thing to understand is that though we have two representatives from the federal government, election administration is highly diffuse, highly driven by state law. So there are over 9,000 voting jurisdictions in the United States. We have 15 in Arizona because elections are administered at the county level. Now in Arizona, that's done in collaboration between the county recorder of the county and the county boards of supervisors. Some of those counties shift responsibilities a little bit differently, but in Maricopa County, both of those bodies are in play. In terms of how elections are administered, there are some broad federal laws, and there are some federal constitutional rights. For instance, the right to vote itself is a federal constitutional right. But in terms of the mechanics of it, that is almost exclusively driven by state law. So Arizona, we have 27 days of early voting. That's state law. Arizona, since 1992, we've had no excuse vote by mail, driven by state law. You can vote in person in Arizona. That's driven by state law. You can vote early in person. That's driven by state law. You have to show identification when you show up to a voting location. State law. We have to confirm your signature if you send back a mail ballot. Driven by state law. We are the only state with a documented proof of citizenship requirement for registering to vote. State law, actually passed by the voters by initiative, by proposition in 2004. So I think that in today's era where we want to nationalize everything and everyone doesn't always responsibly look to their local main newspaper, they oftentimes look to the CNNs or Fox Newses of the world, they get confused. And that confusion is understandable because they might say, hey, what I know is supposed to happen here in Georgia, what I know is supposed to happen here in Pennsylvania, isn't what I see happening in Oregon or in Utah or in Arizona. And that's okay. But this is one of sort of the last vestiges of federalism. If you're someone like me, you actually think that's a beautiful feature of American government because we can experiment. We can have different states try different things. We can look to other states for different ideas. It doesn't mean that something is going wrong. However, like I said, when we talk about sort of the national horse race, there is sort of this federalization of the way we look at it, and people expect administration to conform to that. Now, in terms of administration of elections in Arizona, I think we are one of the most voter-friendly states in the United States. As I mentioned before, no excuse vote by mail. You can get a ballot 27 days before. You can vote in person early. You can vote in person on election day. If you have that mail ballot that's been sitting on your kitchen counter looking at you saying, vote me, you can wait until 6:59 p.m. on election day to go and drop that off. So very voter-friendly system in Arizona. And like many Western states, we have increasingly become a de facto all-mail state in that the vast majority of our voters participate through early ballot in one way or another. So that's a little overview. I think that we have become we've become the belle of the ball. We've become of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world. People are talking about Maricopa County and they're talking about Arizona. They're talking about us just because we're politically dynamic. We're politically exciting right now, and that's both wonderful in the sense that our voices are like people want to talk to us. I don't know that a week's gone by without either President Trump or Vice President Harris or J.D. Vance or Tim Vance. Or so Tim Walz, sorry. I'm still getting used to the new names. Who's been coming to Arizona, and so that's exciting. But it also means, all right. It also means that things are a little emotionally tense, and there's a lot of eyeballs on this process. And so it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, but it's certainly an exciting thing.
So you talk about tension with public interest in our newly competitive state. I want to hover over that for a moment because in a sense it's the reason that we are here tonight is there has been so much focus on election integrity, security, the transparency of the process and such. If you could just briefly address the threats of violence. We have seen as recently as Sunday, once again, an attempted assassination of a major political figure, former President Donald Trump. This is on the heels of an attempted assassination in July. We are, as Arizonans, very familiar with the attack on former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. How much has this permeated election administration? The threats of violence, the overheated rhetoric and such, how much of this is shaping what you are now doing as the county recorder?
It's significant, and security is something that is baked into everything that we do now. That's the security of your ballot, that's the security of the people who work the process, and that's the security of our voters. I think that we have invested more money than would have been imaginable 10 years into securing all three of those aspects of elections, and I don't believe that's a healthy sign for where our political discourse is. In terms of, in light of the attempted assassination of President Trump, part two, I think what is important is that we not lose our moral bearings in terms of assessing these types of things. And so I hope that it is unequivocal and unanimous that people condemn this individual who was on the golf course lying in wait of President Trump, condemn the person who attempted to shoot him or shot him at the rally, and condemn the type of nonsense that unfortunately too many election workers have been subjected to over the past 3.5 years. It is not the way to settle our political differences. It is not the way to have effective change advocacy in this country. And so it's really disheartening, and I think the statistics suggest that like 1 out of every 3 election officials has either has faced a threat or knows an election official who has faced a threat. And in Arizona, I would say it's probably 100%, just because, again, where the tension is, where the political dynamic is, where the political interest is. And I'll just put in a plug real quickly for law enforcement, who has been amazing to a person from my experience, the sheriff's office, the State Department of Homeland Security, the local police departments. But where we have not been amazing is when some political actors will use incendiary rhetoric that they know animates their voters or animates maybe passion to even donate, but is not healthy for the system. And we haven't been amazing always at condemning political actors who maybe within our own camps have said something that we all know goes outside the bounds of just normal political rhetoric. And I think that we need to exert some self-discipline and cabin those types of conversations, because all it takes is one nut who says, somebody said that President Trump needs to be eliminated from the face of the earth. Maybe we all would know that person meant beat him in this election and then may he never run again. But unfortunately, we live in a world in which all it takes is one person to be like, oh, that's licensed to go out and try to shoot him. And unfortunately, we've also seen that in the election context, and it's and targeted towards Democrats, of course, as well.
Okay, Matt and Sam, I want to have you each take a shot at something that is sort of the million-dollar question in all of this. What can we do to lower the temperature in our political discussions in our society? Is there anything that just strikes you as low-hanging fruit that would actually do something to meaningfully change and pull back from this overheated moment?
This is a debate I lose in my own household, and I hesitate to say this in front of somebody who makes his living talking about politics, but turn off cable television. I think that a lot of what passes for political discourse right now actually makes you less knowledgeable about the issues. You're more informed about various people's opinions, but the whole system is designed to basically get you riled up, so you watch through the commercials and then you continue on the next stage. I lose this argument in my house, my own household, but at least I've been able to move the TV upstairs, so I can avoid it. I mean that's one thing, that focusing and obsessing about this is too much. The second is, we had a similar discussion when Gabby Giffords was shot about whether some political speech had encouraged this, and actually it's now a libel trial with Sarah Palin against the New York Times. And showing a causal connection like that with the rhetoric, I think one thing we have to do is recognize that even if we step away from doing this, you're dealing with people who are seriously disturbed. Locked in the young man in Tucson, I don't think he was really aware of what political rhetoric was. The guy on the golf course this weekend had like some amazing rap sheet that it makes you wonder like how he was able to qualify to purchase a semi-automatic AR-15 style weapon. And it's not clear that it's something that until somebody said something that gave him permission to go out and get a gun to try and make a name for himself. So I think Stephen's right in that there are a lot of people saying a lot of irresponsible things. The people who are truly irresponsible are somehow unconnected. I think they're not watching Fox News or MSNBC and saying, now I'm going to go get a gun. And it's an unfortunate situation for for the people who work in elections, for the schools that don't want to be polling places because they're worried about the security of the students. It's a troublesome situation, but really I think in this country, given the vast number of people who can't get access to behavioral health care that they need and who have access to incredibly powerful weapons, kind of hardening security is really what's going to have to get us through this until we can deal with either the firearms issue or the mental health issue.
Matt, you went through this not that long ago in 2022. Can we do anything to bring the dialogue to a point where election workers and such are viewed as just honest brokers?
I think that the political rhetoric went up several notches when social media expanded. I served two different stints in Congress, one during the 90s and then 2012 to 2017, and it was like two different worlds. And I think when people can say anything that's on their mind without having to be accountable for it, sometimes it's not even the right person. I mean, they're using a pseudonym and saying the most horrible things that they possibly can. I hearken back to when John McCain was running against Barack Obama, and he was in a town hall meeting, and a woman stood up and said, he's an Arab, and you can't support him. It's Barack Hussein Obama. And John McCain could have, like most politicians do, just let it go, laughed it off. He stopped. And he said, you know, that kind of rhetoric isn't helpful. And he said, I know Barack Obama, we have a lot of differences of opinion when it comes to policy, but he's a good family man, and he's a decent human being. And I think that those of us that still have a voice that is listened to, we have a responsibility to stand up and try to dial back the rhetoric. It's not okay to hate somebody because of what they believe. That's not okay. And I think we need to send that message out very, very loud and clear that you can disagree without being disagreeable. You can disagree, you can vigorously debate an idea. That's the way it's supposed to be. But to hate someone or wish them harm because of their ideas is un-American.
I will disagree with the first part where you say it's social media. I was doing a little work for this today, and I picked up a copy of Richard Hofstadter's essay from 1964 about the paranoid style in American politics. This is not something that was created by social media. I mean, Hofstadter was writing 60 years ago, and what he is describing is, of course, what we see today, but it's also what we saw during the 60s. But he goes back to the historical, the anti-Masonic history and the know-nothings, and how populists described themselves in a battle for the soul of America, and that the people that they were opposing were somewhat less than human. This is not something new in America. Unfortunately, you're getting your politics from people who grew up during an abnormal period. It's kind of the people who shape what you know about politics grew up from the Second World War to about 1975, 1980. And they get two things out of that. One is that it's sort of bipartisan cooperation. There's this, Lyndon Johnson job-owning people in Congress. And it was when the Democratic Party was Southern conservatives and urban liberals, and Republicans were in New England and whatever. And so you weren't ideologically consistent. The other thing that that shaped there is inflation. They were around for the inflation during the 70s, so they treat it the way your grandmothers talk about the Depression and save tinfoil. So, I mean, it's totally shaped their viewpoint, and it was an abnormal period of time. Newspapers were fat and happy with want ads and car dealerships, and you had this kind of whole political ethos that developed that really is an aberration when you look at American history. So I think what social media has done is bring us back to the 1850s and the 1890s, and it's not that necessarily a pretty sight.
Well, hate speech didn't just begin 20 years ago. The fact is, the Civil War was a pretty horrible time to live, and we had father against son and brother against brother. It was a horrible, horrible time, and I didn't mean to suggest that social media created heat. I think it just spreads it a lot faster in 24/7 news cycles. I'm kind of longing back to the day, present company excluded. I'm talking more about the televised and radio, but it just seems like, where are the days of Walter Cronkite? When we actually had real news and it wasn't just pushing opinions.
That's the golden age of television myth,
Yeah.
where everybody says, oh, it was a golden age of television because, look, there were these 3 good shows. You forget all the crap that was around them. Okay.
I want to move this along in a slightly different direction. I know, and to be continued, right? So, Stephen, much of what comes out of this sort of simmering cauldron of anger publicly ends up in your lap, in a sense, for the election officials across the country, but especially noticeably in a place like Maricopa County, like Arizona, in a swing state. These kinds of feelings seem to be especially intense. Maricopa County has been on the knife's edge, it seems like now, for years. We want to shift to election jobs. Like, what does it take to actually qualify to vote, and what should people know about proof of citizenship, some of the nuts and bolts about who you're letting in, who you're not allowing, and how we know that these folks who are actually casting ballots are legally permitted to do so.
So I'm very pessimistic about social media. I'll just put out that. I do think it is reprogramming our brains, and Matt Salmon in the 1990s could probably go to the newspaper and see the letters to the editor and find out he was a bad person there. Now Matt Salmon can figure that out on demand anytime he wants to, that he is a traitor to the United States. Voter registration. You cannot vote unless you are a registered voter. You cannot get a ballot by mail unless you are a registered voter. If you show up to a voting location and you are not a registered voter, they will say, I'm sorry, we don't have you in our voter registration system. You can cast a provisional ballot, but it will not be tabulated until we reconfirm that you are a registered voter. This is an important principle of elections. If somebody were to drop off just a stack of ballots and a little cat on our doorstep, we would take the cat and we would care for it, but we wouldn't be able to do anything with the ballots because they would not be tied to a registered voter. So what are some of the requirements to be a registered voter in Arizona? You all probably know some of them. What are they? You have to be a United States citizen. Okay, and that is important because that is true in any state in the United States to vote in federal elections or state elections. There are some municipal elections that will allow permanent residents to participate. But to vote in federal elections, you have to be a United States citizen anywhere in the country. Now, Arizona, as I mentioned before, has different documented proof of citizenship requirements. What else? Besides the U.S. citizen, any other requirements? You have to be 18 years of age at the time of the election, so you can register before you're 18, but you have to be 18 at the time of the election. You have to be an Arizona resident 29 days before the election. This is another area where we differ from some states. Some states have what's called same-day voter registration, where if you're not registered, you can show up, you can get registered, you can participate. In Arizona, again, driven by state law, you have to be registered 29 days before the election, and you have to be an Arizona resident 29 days before the election. You cannot be a felon who hasn't had his rights restored. And you can't have been adjudicated incapacitated or incompetent such that, a court says that you have no individual volition. So those are the very basic requirements. Now, I will tell you that we have a lot of registered voters. We have about 2.5 million registered voters in Maricopa County, but we have about 4.6 million residents in Maricopa County, and I assume by the time we walk out of this building, we'll be getting close to 4.7, at the rate that Maricopa County is growing. There are about 300,000, by most estimates, people who are eligible with all the requirements needed to be a registered voter who have not registered to vote. So that is still a thing that is out there. The easiest way to take care of that is to go to servicearizona.com, and you can register to that. We also have, as a result of the federal motor voter law, anytime that you go into the motor vehicle division to update your driver's license or to get a new driver's license, you will be presented with an opportunity to vote. Once you do vote, then there are lots of ways to register, thank you. Once you do register, there are lots of ways to vote, and I discussed some of those, and we can get into maybe at later time some of the securities that are built into there. But again, you have to be a registered voter. So if you ever sort of say like, lots of people say this has never happened, but for instance, if Maricopa County all of a sudden reports 2.6 million votes, but we have 2.5 million registered voters, then you have full license to send me any social media message that you want and say what the heck is going on here, because you cannot have more votes than registered voters, obviously.
But I mean, a couple points from that. I mean, one is that particular thing has never happened. That doesn't stop people who were arguing that, that did happen, you show them that it didn't, and then they just move on to the next thing. There's somehow no penalty for being wrong in Stephen's social media feed. The other
Start
is,
assessing $5 fines.
Yeah, that's I forgot in my bio. I'm the guy who wrote Clue Haywood's a letter for admission to law school. So that's my online claim to fame. The other thing is how decentralized the system is, not just nationally, as Stephen said, where each state has slightly different rules and a slightly different process, but even within Maricopa County, the various streams of how you vote, the various ways the ballots are preserved and protected, the way the system is incredibly decentralized. The idea that someone could push a button somewhere and somehow affect this incredibly decentralized and not connected system to affect the result requires a leap of faith that is taller than any building in this state.
Yeah. Who's seen Independence Day? The movie. You know how all the spaceships are destroying like every major city except for Phoenix. Phoenix is not originally destroyed in that movie. I think we're like second wave or third wave. But
we were smaller then, so.
But Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith, they go up to the mothership and they detonate the nuke, and then all of the Earth level ships, they lose their shield protection. Well, elections are the exact opposite way, where there is no mothership that just like switches to all the things, and that's both a good thing in that it would make it harder to corrupt wholesale the system, but it's a bad thing in that like it's not uniform, and so I think that's exactly right that Sam says that can be thought of as very much a feature rather than an inconvenience.
And it also means that it's a lot slower than a more efficient system. But the comment some guy was jawing at me today that like, I don't believe in vote by mail. You should have to go to the polls. Wait till he sees this fall's Maricopa County ballot with
4 pages.
there's
Is it 2 page? Yeah.
well, two pieces of paper.
See, we don't even know how to describe it now. Yeah. It's 4 pages or 2 pages.
It's four sides, and it's the long paper. So I mean, it has enough words on it that it could qualify as most people's college senior thesis.
At the risk of inducing flashbacks for Matt, I want to have you start by talking about, is there any role for Congress to try and help make more uniform any of our election features as it relates to eligibility, for example, across states in a more clear way? Is there something Washington can or should do to make our system more transparent to those who might have doubts?
You know, that really gets back to this last year I was able to teach a group of seniors in high school about the Constitution, and there was a raging debate when our founders crafted the Constitution as far as giving the states their due rights and their position versus the federal government. And most of the founders truly believed that the real seat of power was in the states. And I'm given that you served in the Federalist Society, I'm a real states' rights kind of guy, and I believe that we're better served when we leave those kinds of decisions up to the states.
Sam, same question to you. Is there anything that you see that Congress could or should be doing to try and bolster public confidence in the system by way of federal legislation to affect elections?
I think ultimately the answer is no if you're going to have a federal system where states are in charge of elections. However, federalism is one of those principles. It's like a tool that you only pick up for particular needs, and so that the Supreme Court was able to, in the Colorado ballot access case, say basically a state can't decide who gets to be on their ballot for a federal office. That's not a state issue. Whereas, lofty paeans to federalism would say, how do you get to that point if you believe in a truly federal system? And the answer is that nobody really does. It's like strict constructionism. Eventually, everybody wants to do something. Same thing with, like right now, the continuing resolution in the House is being held up with the idea that somehow we need federal legislation to prevent non-citizens from voting, when every single state requires citizenship for voting. In each state has their own way of doing it, and somehow the sort of states' rights people want to basically have a federal way of making each state toe the line. I'd be willing to call the bluff on that by saying, okay, you can have some sort of federal standard, but there should be a free federal identification card, a national ID card that everybody has steadfastly resisted. But if there was a free ID card, you could go into a post office, you could get it, you could figure out how to get it online, you could get it to people who are in nursing homes, you could get it to people without any cost, because every other type of proof of citizenship has a fee. I'm not sure that there's, if you don't happen to have it on your person, you have to pay something for it. That would be a trade-off I'd make, but I don't think that's a trade-off anybody wants to make. And this is one of those where I think the issue is more valuable than the solution.
Yeah, that's an issue that has been kicked around in Washington in many,
Or like
many
some
generations.
People, like some people have been speaking in campaigns, we just put a microchip in everybody's head.
It's a thought, right?
Highly efficient. Highly efficient.
I'm being very, very facetious.
Yes. I hope that's understood.
I think
But you are walking around with a device that lets people track where you're going,
That's right.
and
That's right.
it's
I do.
attached to a number that's permanently connected to you. Okay.
I think
Stephen,
what's
And they use those in criminal trials.
Stephen, you look like you wanted to say
what Sam said about the issue being more valuable than the solution, I think describes so much of the conversation regarding election administration right now. I think voter ID is the number one culprit of this. Most academic studies show that requiring voter ID has no effect on voter turnout. Most academic studies show that requiring voter ID has no effect on voter fraud. And yet, if you go to political groups, they will be sending out highly emotional, highly sensational emails saying why if we don't require voter ID, the world goes to hell. If we don't fight voter ID, then the world goes to hell. And I think that's part of what creates some of the concern in the system is you're getting so many of those emails, and then eventually the system's going to decide it's either going to require voter ID or it's not. But how are the people who feel like they lost that argument going to feel about the voter system? Now you're going to feel that there's either mass disenfranchisement happening or there's mass fraud. And unfortunately, it goes back to the conversation we had at the outset, which is just the political incentives right now seem geared towards not having, on the margins, it might have some effect. And if you do another study on this, no, that doesn't sell in politics right now. If you're an activist group or a political candidate, you want fire and brimstone, and that's what we're serving up right now. So I don't know. We've got a bit of a chicken and the egg problem. I think the voters need to demand better than fire and brimstone, and I think that candidates and activist groups need to start delivering better than fire and brimstone.
Okay, so Stephen, I want to stay with you for a moment if we can. If voter ID is one of the hot issues, it seems like tabulation and the segregation of the machines from the internet or whatever malign forces may be somehow connected to those machines. It seems like it's another leading suspect of fraud in our system. Can you tell our audience what they need to know about how secure the machines are and how concerned you are about that as an issue?
You don't need to be. You don't just trust anything just because I come here and say you should trust the machines. No, that should never be the answer. Now, the 93% of voters in the United States will have a paper ballot. In Arizona, we have long had a paper ballot that you mark by hand. If you're a voter in Maricopa County, right now you're filling in ovals. Why is it good to have a paper ballot? Question. It's secure. What do you mean it's secure? It's secure in the sense that if we have electronic Armageddon, if we assume that everything has been hacked, then we still have an immutable paper trail that we can always go back to. So the tabulation machines, they are Scantron machines just like we're used to assess the standardized tests that we all took in high school. They simply read ovals. Now, they're very good in terms of they're very accurate, they're very fast, they're not sleepy, they don't get biased, they don't ask for increased wages or anything like that. But we shouldn't just take them on faith. So what should we do? Well, we should both take the best worlds of both hand counting and machine counting. So we test them before, we test them after. The political parties do a bipartisan hand count audit of a randomly selected batches of ballots to make sure that those machines are accurately tabulating the ovals. So when people say, well, we should hand count, and other people say, well, we should machine count, I guess I'm Pollyannish and want to say, guys, we do both, and isn't that great? And I really do think it's great, and it is, you know, it's a feature that actually has some drawbacks in terms of using paper ballots. But the security professionals like paper ballots because it gives you, again, that immutable, auditable paper trail.
And for people who say you can't trust the machines on the basis of statistical sampling, that there could be some problem somewhere else in this vast sea of 2 million ballots. If you don't believe in statistical sampling, then the next time you go get a checkup and the doctor wants to take a blood test, make sure she takes all of it.
You should talk to your medical advisor before taking that advice.
Okay, I want to start with Matt on this one. You've been in and around elections for a while now. What has been your experience as a Republican speaking to anybody who may be influenced by your views on this? Do you have any misgivings about the way our elections are being administered, the results that you've seen close elections? Should people have any reason to hesitate?
You know, I personally ran for governor back in 2002, and I lost by 10,000 votes.
Which I would have been happy for because I won my primary by 59.
Okay.
Stand a statewide
I
race.
remember, yeah. I do remember that. But, you know, a lot of people came to me and said, you should question the results. It was less than 1% at the polls. And, you know, I believe that the elections were fair. I didn't like the results because I didn't win. But, you know, and when you look at the most recent candidate for governor from the Republican side, she lost by 17,000 votes and yet still hasn't conceded that race. I was going to ask her when she ran for Senate whether she was going to resign to run, resign from governor to run for that race. But the fact is, you know, it's painful to lose, but you always need to do what's in the best interest of everybody. You know, one of my favorite movies was Star Trek. And remember when Spock said the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? And I really believe that. I mean, that's why we get into public office, because the needs of the many outweigh my needs. I had a need to win that election, but the constituents, the voters in Arizona had a need for Arizona government to continue on in a good process that did good things for people's lives. And so the best thing for me to do in that case was to stand down and accept the judgment of the people of Arizona. And so I've won some and I've lost some, but I've never ever doubted the veracity of our voting. I think it's reasonable, and I think it's done effectively. And you know, most of my political career, we were kind of the luminary in the country as far as the way our votes were conducted in Arizona. Everybody kind of pointed at us and said, look how great Arizona does on the election. And there's so many different checks and balances in the process. You know, I've heard people say that you can dump a bunch of votes in the voting box. How many people have actually been to the polls and see how difficult it is? You have to go through so many levels of showing your identification and going through the computer and doing this and that. By the time everything is over, you realize that there are poll workers that are there that are different parties, and that's required by statute, that the parties, it can't all be one party at a poll. And then besides that, there are volunteers from both the Republican and the Democrat parties that are there watching to make sure that everything's fair. I think we have a very, very safe system.
Sam, Democrats have had a good run lately in statewide races in Arizona, but they've also lost a lot of down ballot races. And certainly when you were on the ballot, there was a lot of tough nights for Democrats.
Or state party chair, yeah. Sure.
Did you ever have misgivings about the integrity of the election administration and the results?
No, I mean, when I lost, I knew it was the judgment of the voters of Arizona, the sons of bitches. But it never even occurred to me to think of that somehow there was something wrong with the system. Now, it is a human system. And there are 7 million people in the state. There's, Stephen, what, like roughly about 4 million 4.1 million registered voters. And, you know, turnout, you would say somewhere is like around 60, maybe 70%. So that's a vast sea of ballots. Could I find one error in that vast sea of ballots? Could I find 2 or 3? I probably could if you gave me enough money and you gave me enough time. It would take me years and you wouldn't care anymore. But if any human system, you're going to find like 1 or 2 or 3 mistakes like that. But ultimately, the system works. And it worked when I won and it worked when I lost. And what really chaps me is these people complaining about the system who had no problem with their primary this time because they won. And if you want to see people who use motivated reasoning, I think it's those people complaining about it's the same system governed Stephen's primary last month as did the 2022 election. And all these people complaining about it are basically, you know, I thought the whole point of you guys on the right is you didn't care about our feelings. We're just responding to their emotions.
I don't, honestly.
I know you
All
don't,
right.
but they want to basically throw everything out because somehow they have a feeling that something's wrong. And it's nonsense.
Well, if Stephen was a cheater, he's the rottenest cheater I've ever seen in my life.
I don't know. I don't know, Matt.
Same thing when you beat Adrian.
Matt came up and told me life only gets better after, so maybe it was smart.
I wasn't going to bring up the primary for Stephen, but I will bring up the primary in another context for him. We saw an incredibly close Democratic primary as well. And in Yasmin Ansari's race, that moved from, I believe, 42 votes to 39 after the recount was completed. So kudos to your staff for the way that all was handled and the integrity around getting it right the first time and keeping it there. But I wanted to ask you, with everything that you know about the job and the way, the environment that we operate in, is there anything that you would like to see changed at the state level?
So one, fraud does happen. Garden variety fraud does happen. Mistakes happen. You better believe mistakes happen. You try to build systems that catch those mistakes, that absolutely minimize those mistakes. The other thing I will say is, for garden variety fraud, mom dies 2 days before ballots go out. Mom lives with you. Ballot still comes to mom, to the address. You know what mom's signature looks like. You're going to fill out mom's ballot. You even knew how mom was going to vote. You fill out mom's signature. You put it back in. Well, guess what? After the fact, we're going to find out that mom died before ballots went out. We're going to refer that to the Attorney General's office. But in the meantime, that's garden variety fraud that's going to get through. I have seen nothing to suggest that only Republicans do that or only Democrats do that. So while this might not sound very warm and fuzzy to you, those garden variety frauds that do happen in every election probably balance each other out. But human error does happen, and we need to test it. That's why every system should be documented and should be tested. And the other thing, getting to the Democratic contest in Congressional District 3 in South Phoenix and West Phoenix, you use every legal means at your disposal. We have a good election law bar here in Arizona, and Sam's firm is certainly a robust part of that. And that's what the courts are for. So if you think that there is error, or if you think that there was inaccuracy that affects your election, then the courts are the proper place to adjudicate that. But once that's done, then it's done, and it's time to do exactly as Sam and Matt mentioned. Now, in terms of systems, I think that I am probably one of the leading voices at saying that at this point I would trade some convenience of the voters for having a higher percentage of results available within the first 24 hours. I think that has become an increasingly important thing as our contests are so close. Go back to 2004 when George W. Bush was running against John Kerry. The second Arizona produced results, all the national networks called Arizona for George W. Bush. The second California produces results in this 2024 general election contest, they will call it for Vice President Harris. Why is that? Because with 40 to 50 to 60% of results in, their statistical models can show you that based off of the 20 or 30% vote difference, that's already going to be, you can already call that state. That is not the case in Arizona anymore. We are going to continue to have razor-thin margins in these statewide contests. So what does that mean? That means that networks can't call the races until they have a higher percentage of results in. What does that mean? How do we get to that? Well, I've been an advocate for, again, adopting something that we've seen work in Florida. Again, states being the laboratories of democracy, where in Florida you have to turn in your early ballot by Saturday before Election Day, Tuesday. That gives election offices all the time to scan it in, to do signature verification, to do the ballot auditing, to send it to a bipartisan team, and to tabulate it. I think that that is a trade-off that I would want to make. Now, many of my Dem friends say, no, we do not want to sacrifice that convenience of being able to drop it off until 7 p.m. on election night. That's a policy difference, and we will disagree on that. But it is one that I think at least merits assessment by our legislative branch.
We are reaching near the end of this evening. I want to make sure if you have any questions, please make sure you've written them down. We're about to see them collected here. Matt, I want to turn to you for a moment. You understand the dynamics at the state capitol right now, given Governor Hobbs as a Democrat and the Republican-controlled legislature. Is there any reasonable prospect for any kind of election-related reforms that both sides could get behind?
I think given the makeup of the legislature right now and Governor Hobbs, I don't see them coming to grips with anything, because it seems like the Republicans kind of want to overreach on what they want to accomplish, and they want to do something that paints the Democrats as evil and them as good. And so in a lot of ways it seems more like messaging than it is actually legislating. And so I don't see anything in the immediate future that they're going to agree on. I don't know, the idea that you're throwing out there is a provocative one that, could generate a debate, and I don't necessarily think it's a Republican or a Democrat idea, but my guess would be no.
Sam, Democrats are trying to take the legislature for the first time in memory. They also have some ideas around elections and how we should be allowing people to vote and such. If Democrats did take the legislature with Governor Hobbs still there, what might the public expect to see?
If I had to bet, I would think the first thing you would see would be an unwinding of a number of the restrictions that the Republicans have put on the initiative and referendum process. I think actually, rather than dealing with candidate elections or elections as a whole, I think you're going to see kind of unwinding those things that the Republicans have done, because Democratic memories will be very strong of what it's like to be in the minority. I think that's they'll recognize that it's not a sure thing that they have the trifecta. Might as well do that as a safety valve for progressive ideas. As far as election things go, the interesting thing for Stephen's idea about having an earlier, getting rid of the late earlies. I love that the way people talk about the late earlies are the people who ask for an early ballot but turn them in at the last possible minute, is the dynamics of that may have shifted because, for example, in 2018, there was a blue shift in the election. The ballots that came in later had a distinct Democratic tilt as opposed to everything that had been counted up to that point, and that's how Kirsten Sinema won her Senate race. In 2020 and in 2022, you saw a red shift, and I think, you know, Stephen's putting this idea out, but I think if, you know, I'm not going to talk about this. I want all sorts of Republicans to think that this is their idea, and it might actually happen.
What about voter initiatives? This is something that has been kicked around at the State House for some time as well, whether rules need to change around that. What can voters hope to achieve sort of outside the legislature by way of pushing forward, whether it's on abortion rights or minimum wage and whatnot? Do either you, Sam, or Matt think that there's any space for the public to sort of steer this conversation?
Well, this is pretty inside baseball if you want to talk. I mean, the things I was talking about were like, you know, petition formats and signature verifications and, you know, who can be a circulator or not. That's pretty inside baseball, and I hesitate to say that there's going to be a real public input on that. I mean, this is, that's pretty fine-tooth stuff for it. But I mean, the one advantage that Stephen had with his proposal about the cut off the deadline for early voting is that that's much more understandable than what I'd be talking about with voter initiatives or whatever. But I think that would be the Democratic, if there is a Democratic trifecta, I think that would be what you'd see on the election law, which is to try and undo a number of the restrictions on initiatives that the Republicans have tried to put on because they were an end round around the Republican-controlled legislature, so that's where the incentives were.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of frustration about the initiative process because it seems like a lot of money is coming in to the state there are a lot of folks that want to try to nationalize issues. And if they're successful in one state, they're hopeful that they can be successful in other states. And I think there's a lot of frustration about the initiative process and how much outside money comes into Arizona to start different kinds of initiatives. You know, when we became a state, that was kind of the reform era. And most of the states that became states around the same time as us, and I think wasn't Colorado and New Mexico about this. I'm sorry?
Well, New Mexico was.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
New Mexico.
Colorado is the centennial state, so they're a letter.
Okay, right. But the idea was that they wanted to put a lot more of the power back into a real democracy where the people actually got to vote instead of a representative form of government all the time. And that's kind of how we came up with the initiative process and the referendum
although
process.
Interesting historical anecdote, if we can go back, is that Taft was president and refused to admit Arizona as a state with that progressive era initiative and referendum in the state constitution. So it was taken out, Arizona was admitted to a state, and then the state constitution was amended to put it back as soon as possible.
Right. But I think a lot of state legislators, and I've been a state legislator, the reason we have a representative form of government is because not everybody can really leave their job and research the issues to the degree that somebody who's elected to spend full time trying to understand those issues can do. And so if we have a representative form of government, then let's have a representative form of government. I think that's the frustration, I think, of folks in the legislature, and that, you know, on some very, very complex issues, it's boiled down to bumper stickers and campaign signs, and a lot of times, you know, decisions are made that you can't take back because of other constitutional changes we made through the initiative process, and it's frustrating.
I want to move to the questions from the audience here. Stephen, I think this one is best for you. Are you happy with the funding to secure election offices' computers from foreign hacking? Also sort of related is, are there more steps to make drop box voting feel safe and secure?
Okay. Funding question. Of my top 10 concerns, funding is not one of them. I will say that is very unique across the country for election offices. And that just is a testament to the fiscal management of Maricopa County and the fact that we continue to grow and we derive most of our revenue from property taxes. So as long as people keep buying property in Maricopa County, then the county will continue to do that. In terms of drop boxes, we have 2 outdoor drop boxes planned for the 2024 election, and then a whole bunch of indoor drop boxes at different government facilities and voting locations. During the 2022 election, there was some, I think, brouhaha is the technical term for it, regarding the drop box here in Mesa, with some people sort of monitoring it, and I think that some of them had guns, correct, and so there was an injunctive relief granted in one situation against a group called the Lions of Liberty. I think that, it's sort of it is a sad situation. It will also be an interesting First Amendment question where your rights to protest begin and end. And so I would not be surprised if we saw this one back in the courts again. That being said, again, I'll go back to law enforcement knows that elections is a thing now. They are ready. They will not intervene to quash anyone's First Amendment rights. They will not intimidate anyone at a voting location, but law enforcement is ready to respond when needed, and I think that we will be ready. But again, that delineation is a nuanced one, and we don't want to be trampling on anyone's First Amendment rights, but we also don't want any voters to be intimidated.
And thank you for it. Stephen may have some thoughts on what are described as ridiculous legal challenges, but I want to turn to Sam and Matt for this one. What can be done to penalize those kinds of frivolous lawsuits and other challenges? Is there any real space? Is there a need?
Sam, being an attorney, probably has some better ideas through the legal realm, what can be done. But I think when somebody brings a frivolous lawsuit, obviously forcing them to pay the other side's legal bills seems to be a good way of handling it. And also, we've seen that attorneys that take on cases that are not credible at all sometimes face penalties with the bar. And so those things are possibilities, and I think they ought to be continued. But I don't know, Sam, are there other things that can be done?
I'm going to echo Stephen's comment about funding, about, I got 1,000 problems, but I don't think that's necessarily one of them. I think the system, we have a pretty well-developed system of election court cases with both lawyers who know they're going to be dealing with each other. The judges know what they're doing, and I think those cases were resolved pretty well. I think if we were going to worry about something, it's not kind of the frivolous litigation. It's more members of some of the non-Maricopa County boards of supervisors deciding that they know more than 7 million, 4.1 million Arizona registered voters, and the Arizona legislature, that somehow they're going to get to the bottom of this, and those people going rogue, I think, is a much greater concern. And what about the cost of the audits? Because we had 2 in 1 year, didn't we? Yeah, well, I think we got from an entertainment value, an entertainment perspective.
Actually, Mexico paid for it.
Yeah. No, I think I think people got basically, it was fascinating programming, and I think we got our entertainment value. And when they actually,
That was my life you're talking
I-
about.
and when these bozos come up and say, oh yeah, you know, the numbers the numbers that Stephen gave you, you know, if anything, Biden won by more. I think that I loved seeing that pie on that face.
No, I don't think we want to do that again, because I think that hurt our political conversation. I think it was a race to the bottom within the Republican Party throughout the 2022 cycle as a result of that. And I think we're a state that has just such a great reputation and has so many things going for it, that the only thing that can derail us is getting in our own way. And I thought that was a time in which we were getting in our own way.
I would agree with you perfectly. I'm just speaking as a partisan. If you want to keep stepping on rakes, that I think that if the legislature,
I think that audit is a good reason why we have a Democratic governor, 1.5 Democratic U.S. senators, Democratic Secretary of State, and a Democratic Attorney General right now.
Stephen, I want to stay with you for this next one. Have you seen anything attributable to Russian propaganda or influence campaign in Arizona's election processes?
So no, but those darn Russians, they don't let you know, but it is well documented that the Cold War is not over, so all those James Bond films we watched growing up, they still apply, and that now they have an interest in sowing unrest in the United States, and one of their newest means is through social media, race baiting Americans against each other, sowing propaganda, sowing misinformation, and I guess they've decided that they can't beat the United States in the Olympic Games that they weren't even invited to this time. They can't beat the United States in a military conflict, so the United States has to destroy itself from within. We know that in 2016, Russians tried to target various election infrastructure. So the good thing to note here is that no tabulation equipment is connected to any sort of internet, so you can't hack that. But then, again, we have those paper ballots, but we have seen targeted attacks on, for instance, websites. So we do post to our website, for instance, where are all the locations that voters can go to. And so cybersecurity has become a real thing in the elections community over the last 8 to 10 years, in part because of increased cyber attacks from our foreign adversaries. Russia and Iran are the two that are most frequently named.
This one may be a quick answer. If someone casts an early ballot and then dies before Election Day, is that vote valid?
Lawful vote.
How can citizens who are disabled or lack transportation, et cetera, get their ID as they can't get to the DMV?
So if you have limitations on your ability to vote, there are a couple options. So you do need to be a registered voter, and so you need all the requirements to be able to do that. If you would like to, for instance, if you have visual limitations, we can send you a Braille ballot. We can send you a large print ballot. If you are in a nursing home and you can't write you can't pick up the oval, we can send a bipartisan team out to meet you, and you can orally relay it, and then they have to write down who those two bipartisan members are, and they have to log their activities. If you show up to a voting location, you still have to present an ID no matter what your physical limitations. Now, there are various types of identification that can work. I will tell you 99% of people bring their driver's license, their Arizona driver's license. I guess if you're in that situation, help us help you by thinking about it now and by contacting my office or the Arizona Clean Elections or Arizona Secretary of State, and this is something that we can get you through. If you are a lawfully registered voter, we want to make sure you are able to participate in the election if you want.
If the question is about how you can obtain the proof of citizenship that you need to become a registered voter, there are nonprofits that can help people if they're disabled for that, and there are community resources that are available.
Are there any that you want to recommend?
I am totally blanking. I do this because I work with Mercy Care, and there is a website that kind of offers kind of links to various services that will do that. But if you, a lot of these are geographically dependent. They serve particular areas. So the best thing to do is to ask somebody who can connect you to social services in your area, whether it's the city of Mesa or wherever you happen to live, that there can be resources that can help you get through the ID process. There are also nonprofits that help people who can't afford ID, because that's a big issue for the unhoused and the homeless who need to have some sort of identification. And there are nonprofits that work with those agencies to try and get people who are lawful American citizens who could register to vote, but they need the ID that could get them through that process.
This, this one is for Matt. Do you
Parties
think?
will too. The party usually has volunteers that'll take, both parties have volunteers that'll take people to polls too.
This one is for Matt. Do you think Arizona should enact or pass laws to punish spreaders of misinformation or disinformation?
Well, we already have laws. In fact, Stephen is kind of the poster boy. He won a major lawsuit against a person that slandered him, and they just haven't decided how much yet, right? So I think that the process is there. It's always been one of my really big frustrations, is that our slander laws and our libel laws in the past haven't seemed to apply when you're in a political race, and that you can say anything. I've always really taken umbrage with that. I don't think that that's a good way to go. I think out and out lying about somebody and saying something malicious, because the campaigns today, they're not about winning races, they're about trying to destroy people. And that's what it's become. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be a comeuppance. I think that Stephen is a good example of that. I hope we see more of that.
Sam, this one is for you. Suppose we accept federal voter ID in exchange for eliminating the Electoral College.
Any trade that ends with eliminating the Electoral College. My answer is yes. What's the question?
I would just say, beware unintended consequences. Right. It wasn't so long ago that the partisan dimensions of that were flipped, and in fact, I'm sure Matt remembers quite well when it was state Republican legislators who were crying to abolish the Electoral College in the 80s and 90s, right, or something like that. And so, so I would just say beware of unintended consequences.
Okay, I think this may be the last question of the night, and frankly, it's the one that makes me the happiest. How to work for election precincts and why many complaints at the polls. If people want to participate in this, what do they need to be doing?
You need poll workers, don't you? I mean, they call your office?
Well, so there's lots of ways to get involved. You can, as Matt mentioned, you can be a volunteer for your political party, and you can be stationed as an observer at any voting location or at our central count facility. You can come join us and be complicit in whatever good or bad that we are doing. We need Republicans, we need Democrats, we need independents. We hire about 3,000 temporary workers for the general election. That can range from 2 months, like right now, to 1 day if you want. That can range from driving a box truck to working in a warehouse to doing signature verification to working at a voting location. There are lots of ways to get involved. If this is something that you're passionate about, please reach out. The best website for Maricopa County is getinvolved.maricopa.vote. So that's getinvolved.maricopa.vote. And then I guess I would just say sort of more, my closing remarks and leaving something with you is demand better. I think that I hope we're bottoming out pretty soon in terms of our political conversation.
There is
I hope we've hit the bottom. But demand better from your politicians. Don't just, whatever sort of that appeals to your alligator brain that just makes you immediately clamp down on. But we want people who are serious thinkers. We want people who care about policy. We want John Kyle, one of the sort of leading lights of Arizona Republican world, or at least the Arizona Republican world I used to know, used to say that there are three kinds of horses in Congress. There's the show horses, there's the work horses, and there's the horse's ass. We want more of the workhorses. We want more of the serious political thinkers, and so demand better. And because if there's one incentive that politicians respond to, it's the electoral incentive. And so if you demand it from them, then I think behavior will start to change.
Well, it is 8:15 and our time is up for the evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I want to thank our distinguished panel for making time and sharing their insights on this very important subject, and truly grateful for you all for caring on this really important subject as well. I want to put in a reminder one more time. We have a survey waiting for you with your seats. You can point your phone camera at that, and it should take you to this. I believe it's a multiple choice survey. So please, if you would, take a moment and do that. And vote. Thank you.